Welcome to Follow Me to the MROP, a podcast dedicated to the journey of the masculine soul and the transformative power of initiation. My name is Brian Mueller. I live in suburban Dayton, Ohio, and I made my rites at Pilgrim Park in Illinois in 2014. I'm your host, and in each episode of our show, I'll sit down with one man who has made his rites, and I'll invite him to tell his story. This won't be an abstract explanation or a theological lecture, just a real conversation about what it was like to cross that threshold at the rites and what changed afterward. Before we begin, a quick word of gratitude. This podcast is brought to you by Choosing Presence. We believe that the greatest gift a man can give his community is his own presence. In a world of constant distraction, Choosing Presence provides the tools to help you stay grounded in the now. If you'd like an easy way to begin learning about the practice of presence, you can download the free Practicing Presence app at choosingpresence.org/app. Now, the Men's Rites of Passage, or MROP, is an experience designed to help men move from the first half of life into the second, shifting from a focus on ego and achievement to a life of meaning and soul. On this show, we just don't talk about the rites in theory, we talk to the men who have walked the path. Today, we are joined by a man who has made his rites, and we're going to hear exactly what that journey looked like for him. My guest today is Ken Beck. Brother, I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for making time and for being willing to share your story.
Thanks for inviting me, Brian.
Ken, tell us where you're from and how you spend your time these days.
I'm in Minneapolis, and I spend my time teaching. I'm still a full-time middle school public teacher, 8th grade math, although next year I might be 6th grade. We'll find out. That's making me a little nervous because I've been here for a long time at this grade level. Anyway, so I'm spending my time teaching, and I've got 2 sons that are both grown and out of the house. So my wife and I are just enjoying time riding bicycles when we can, and I'm also pretty involved in the church too. So
now let's dive in and talk about the Men's Rites of Passage. The MROP is a unique experience. It's not a retreat or a workshop. It's an initiation. Many men arrive at the rites at a crossroads in their lives, looking for something they can't quite name. Before we dive into the why and the how, let's start at the very beginning. Where and when did you make your rites again?
I did my rites in 2013 in Minnesota, and that was called Osprey Wild. It used to be called the Audubon Center of the North Woods.
And who was the weaver, and about how many men would you say were there?
The weavers, I think it was like a co-weaving thing. It was like Kevin Anderson and Bob White. And I think we had 60 guys there, I want to say. It was kind of a bigger crowd.
Now, when you think back to that weekend, what's the first image that comes forth for you?
My first image was the boulder that I sat on during our time in the wilderness. We had some time to spend outside in silence and not checking things off of our to-do list, but just to be in wilderness. And I found this kind of a liminal rock. It was like behind me was forest, and then in front of me was plains, this like field. And I sat on this boulder, and that's where I spent my wilderness time. It wasn't the most comfortable thing, and it turns out the ticks were really loving that boulder because I was near oak trees, and the deer were coming eating. Not when I was there, but they would come and eat the oak, and then ticks would fall off of them, and then they'd crawl on me. So that's what I remember most is the rocks. Not the ticks, but the rocks.
Now, when you think back to that entire weekend as a whole, in a very general way, what was that like for you?
Well, I was kind of nervous getting there, but it was transformative. I emerged as a different person, and it wasn't like a light switch. It was more like an ironing board. That transition was quite slow. Like it didn't happen right when I came back. It was kind of slow as I slowly absorbed all of the things that I witnessed, all the stories that I heard, all the stories that I shared from my own background, and the rituals, of course, and the time in nature. Having never done a men's retreat before, I was part of a men's group at the church, but that was mostly about cooking breakfast and signing up for things to do around the church. It wasn't really diving deep. So it was transformative, I guess, is the best way to say it.
Now, without sharing anything you'd consider confidential, is there a particular memory or encounter with another man that you're willing to share that captures what the rites meant to you at that time?
I remember hearing a lot of the kind of the pain and grief that other men have experienced and are experiencing still. And that was very moving. It had a deep impact on me, is witnessing one of the grief rituals and participating in that and hearing the stories in I don't know if we called them home groups at the time. Now they're called counsel circles, but just being a witness to people who, there was not a priest, but there was a person who had a religious role to play in his church. And he was questioning whether God existed. I mean, it's like a really deep personal thing. There was another guy who experienced violence and another guy who is just, you know, anyway, it's just the grief and the pain and the stories are just so deep in these men. And I was also very happy to witness that and not try to cure it and not try to fix it and not recommend a book or not recommend a therapist or whatever. It's just, I hear you, brother. I'm with you shoulder to shoulder. I don't know. It's leaving me speechless because you don't really know what to say in response, except I hear you.
Yeah, thank you for that reflection. I was talking to another man in our community that's much more of an elder, and he was saying that what he's realizing becoming an elder is that it's a lot of it's about holding space. And I hear you describe that there.
Yeah, I'm stumbling over words because it's really hard to explain. But not only are you receiving vulnerability, but you're being vulnerable yourself. And that, again, for me, in this context, it only happens in those counsel circles. I mean, for other men, it might help in other spaces too, but that was a big part of it, is receiving and having that space of vulnerability and digging deep.
Let me ask you to go back to just before the rites, whatever that period was that led up to you registering for the rites. What were the circumstances in your life? What caused you to say, yes, this is something I would like to do?
Well, I initially went because it was the 10-year anniversary of my dad's death. So Dad died in 2003, and he was an okay dad. He did fine. He, with the tools that he had available. He was a truck driver in South Dakota, and he had raised 4 boys and stayed married all of his life. But I never really grieved his death. And I went there thinking I was going to deal with that. But instead, I ended up dealing with this totally different shadow within myself, involving my job and this thing that happened with a student. And it was something that I was shameful of. And I kept it a secret. And I didn't share things. And for years, I would not share this story. And finally, I decided, you know what? Instead of dealing with Dan's death, this is bigger. This is something that's got control over me. And I decided to share that story with my home group, my counsel circle. And that shadow then was lifted. It's still there, but it's lifted. It no longer controls me as it used to. And kind of forgot the question. I think I answered the question.
Yeah, I was really asking why you decided to sign up for the rites. But let me ask, how did you learn about the rites? How did you know that this was an offering out there for you?
T. Michael Rock had invited me. So he went 4 years prior. And in Minnesota, we'd host it every 2 years. And so I was part of this men's group of the church. But like I said, the men's group was mostly focusing on just kind of organizing things and fixing light bulbs and cooking breakfast. We did have one service project. We would go cook a meal at this men's shelter in Minneapolis. And so that was meaningful, but there was really no deep sharing. And T. Michael had encouraged us to go in 2009 with him, and I didn't go. And then he encouraged us to go in 2011, and I didn't go. So I finally decided, 2013, Dad died 10 years ago. Maybe I should go and kind of deal with this kind of stuff. And like I said, I ended up dealing with something totally different.
So how did your friends, your family, perhaps your wife, or if you had a spiritual director or other people, how did they respond to your decision when you said, yeah, I'm going to this event, I'm going to attend the rites?
I think there's a lot of confusion. They didn't really know what it was. Some of them might have thought, well, why is this for men? I'm white, Christian, middle-aged, right-handed, and isn't the world already about you? Why are you going off on this retreat? And it was really hard to explain. I got support, of course. I mean, nobody said, no, don't go, whatever. But there was this kind of a little bit of confusion, but like, okay, he's going to go do this thing. That's fine. I got a lot of support from my wife, though. That was the biggest supporter.
I've been to the Osprey Center. What is it called? The
Osprey Wilds, yeah.
Yeah, the Osprey Wilds. The first time I was there, I think it was still being referred to as the Audubon Center of the North. And it's just a beautiful location. And as somebody that not from Minnesota, I just love that setting right next to a really large lake. Just beautiful, beautiful. And I don't know if the rites was your first time there, but what I'm leading you to is when you arrived at the rites, when you pulled in and you knew you were about to enter sort of this liminal space, this sacred space, and go through this experience, Was there something that you were hoping for or that you really wanted to be initiated into?
Before I went, I read Richard Rohr's From Wild Man to Wise Man. And so I was hoping to be initiated into a more comfortable, I guess, dialogue with other men until my rites. I found them to be either intimidating or something. I felt like I lacked what it took to participate in any conversation with any group of guys. I can remember this as a kid too. I remember going to visit uncles and aunts in South Dakota and stuff, and I was more comfortable in the kitchen with the women than in the living room or outside with the guys because they were talking about farming equipment and neighbors and sport things and hunting and things that I didn't really have any particular interest in. So I was hoping to be just initiated into my own flavor of masculinity, I guess. I don't conform to a lot of the things that a typical guy, American guy, does, but I still identify as a male, as a man, and I just really wanted to be initiated into that. And also being a teacher and having students of all genders in my classroom, being a good role model for them too. But that was, not even secondary, maybe tertiary, kind of like it was really low on the totem pole. I think most of my reasoning was for my own initiation into just what does it mean to be a man?
I don't want to simplify your answer there, Ken, but if I may, what I'm hearing you say is that you really wanted some affirmation of your own masculinity. I think a lot of our listeners probably feel that as well.
Absolutely.
Now, is there anything that you were fearing as you entered the rites?
Oh, yeah. Well, like I already said, I found men to be intimidating. So being with a group of men, only one of whom I know, that was intimidating. So I knew T. Michael was there. He was one of the speakers. So that was intimidating. And I also, for some reason in my head, I got some of the instructions wrong or something. I don't know what it was, but I thought we were going to be spending 24 hours out in the wilderness just by myself, like no tent or nothing. And I was a little afraid of that. I calmed down once I realized, oh no, you've got 24 hours there's like a fasting and some silence and stuff like that. But it's not you out in the wilderness. It's you spending some time in the wilderness, but it's safe. You'll be in the daylight. And, it's not like you're totally roughing it. So I was a little intimidated, a little scared by that. But I think most of that fear was just being around men that I don't know. And then the second part of it was a misunderstanding on my part, which got cleared up relatively quickly once I got there.
So, it's the rites. I always say it's a significant experience. It's better part of 5 days. You're there for 4 nights, but eventually it does come to an end and it's time for you to leave. How did you feel immediately after you left the Osprey Wilds and started your return to normal life, so to speak?
I was kind of floating. There was so much that happened that I needed time to process it. And I rode there and back with some other, again, people I don't know. I think there's 3 guys. One of whom is now on the core team here in Minnesota with me. And we were kind of processing it together on the drive back, and I still needed some time. I didn't get it, but I needed some time to just kind of sit and journal and think about it or whatever. Eventually I did, but I really felt like I needed to come back and have like a whole day or a half day to just kind of process what was happening, to look over the notes that I took and look over the handouts and just refresh myself in what had just happened. Because it's a long 5 days. I mean, it feels like you're there for like 2 weeks. You gather together in the evening. It's like, well, wait a minute, was that talk just this morning? It felt like it was 2 days ago.
Yeah. It's been a significant amount of time. It's been more than a decade since you made your rites. What has changed in your life practically, relationally, even spiritually in that time?
Oh, there's tons. I can list tons of things. My appreciation for poetry, I think, has grown. I'll even not be afraid to write a poem now, whereas before I was like, oh, I can't do this. But now I'm like, oh yeah, this is how I express myself. Nobody else is going to read it or care. So that's fine. I think my relationship with other men, I don't have that fear anymore. Like if I'm in a gathering and there's other men there, I can connect a lot better and I'm more secure in myself. And even though they might still talk about sports or cars or whatever, I can still listen and appreciate and value that brother for what they're sharing, and they're sharing something of interest and value to them, or maybe they're trying to put up a face and a mask that, that they don't want penetrated, and maybe I can come back to them later. And anyway, what's changed in me has, oh boy, I want to say everything, but like my role in the church, I'm getting tapped for different leadership positions in places. I'm not asking for these things, but people are saying, "Hey, we would like you to be our treasurer at the church," or they want me to be the moderator at the church. And I'm a union leader in my building now, and people are starting to see that there's something in me. And it sounds like I'm bragging, but they're starting to see something in me that they want in leadership. And I don't think that was there before.
Yeah, it sounds to me, I mean, the first word that comes to mind is assertive, but I'm also hearing that you feel more comfortable in stepping into leadership roles. And
Yeah.
you found that capacity within yourself.
Right. Because before I would say, "Oh gosh, no," or I would say yes because I don't want to disappoint somebody. But now I'm like, oh, I do see how I can contribute and lead this group to wherever it is they're going. Depends on what the group is, I guess.
So it sounds to me like the rites did help affirm you as a man and your masculinity. But what really I'm curious about is how did your conversations, specifically with other men, but within people in general, change after the rites?
I have learned to bring in some of those concepts of counsel to my conversation. Listen from the heart and speak from the heart, and be spontaneous and be lean of expression. So those core tenets of that counsel circle, I bring those into staff meetings or whatever, and I try to use those and truly, truly listen to what other people are sharing, whether it's in a meeting, something that's a bit more formal, something that's somebody sharing with me. So I know at my church, other men have gone to Illumin events, or some of them have done the full rites, and my relationship with them is very different too. And I can give them a full, almost bear hug, and right in the middle of church, and people might be wondering, well, what's that about? And well, they can find out, I guess. But anyway, so I feel like I have grown into my energies, my warrior and magician and lover and king energies. That might be more than 4. I don't know, but I feel like I've grown into my healthy masculinity.
Yeah, well, thank you. That sounds very affirming. I appreciate that. I do want to know what not that you had a real strong sense of this beforehand or an articulation for what masculinity initiated the male purpose was, or has that shifted since going on the rights?
Yeah, I think so. I used to view masculinity and being masculine as being just the protector and the provider and the fixer-upper guy. A man can go out and fix his garage door or fix this or that or the other thing. And most of the time when I try to fix stuff, I end up making it worse and needing to call somebody who knows what they're doing. And I used to be kind of ashamed of that too. And there's also that financial piece too. I mean, as a public school teacher, I'm not swimming in money over here. And I used to be a little intimidated by that. And now I'm not. I'm just, we live within our means and we enjoy what we have, and we share and we contribute and we give. And I've learned that masculinity is so much broader and deeper than that, than just the protector, that warrior energy stuff from my 20s and 30s.
Well, I've known you for a while, Ken, and you've obviously been involved in the Illumin community for many years, and you have a strong regional community up in Minnesota. My question is, what would you tell a man? Well, first, let me just acknowledge that it's difficult sometimes to invite a man to participate in the rites and for him to say yes. It's not as straightforward as it might seem. And so my thought here is, what would you say to a man who's trying to discern whether or not to participate in the rites?
I would say, and I've heard other podcasts of yours, and a lot of the guys would say if you're stuck, and I think that's really true. Like if you're finding yourself confronting a challenge and the old way of doing things, the old way of being a man doesn't fix that challenge, whatever it is for you. What do you mean I've got this challenge? I just bought a new pickup truck. I just have a bigger boat. I just got a promotion at my job, but yet I'm still having this issue. I'm still having this grief. I'm still feeling this pain, and it's not going away. I've got this distance in this relationship or that, or whatever it is. If you're feeling like you're missing something, then I would if you're discerning at all, I would say go. If you've rejected it outright, then you probably aren't even listening to this anyway. But But if you're discerning at all, I would encourage you to go, to do it. I think you will find it transforming and worth the 5 days and the time and the money and the travel, because what you're going to gain out of it is a deep relationship with other men and with yourself and with creation too.
Thank you so much for that. Now, I also want to ask you, since I have you on here, you were talking about even being intimidated by relationships with other men. I think the first time I came up to an event in Minnesota was 2018. And I remember sitting in council with a group of men, and some of them were from Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Dakotas. And I was really taken by honestly, intimidated by sort of the stoicism that I encountered in council. Men that would be very quiet, not say a word. And yeah, I found it a little bit intimidating, and probably it contributed to me being a little bit more speaking too much, honestly. But what's really curious to me is that, lately I just read Iron John. It took me a long time to go back and encounter that book, because the times that I had encountered Robert Bly in his interviews and things like that, he seemed like a strong man. And he had that, I've told other men, he had the voice of the inner critic in my head, a very angry, kind of strong. And I realized, no, he was much more tender than that. And my point here is that Bly is from your region of the country. And he is considered one of the guys that had founded the mythopoetic movement that kind of started in maybe the 80s and really took off and has contributed to not only things like the Mankind Project, but, what we do in Illumine. So I wanted to ask you, as somebody from the Dakotas in Minnesota, what is it in the culture there that leads to this men's work, or what is needed by men in the culture that has caused this work to be developed and cultivated in that region?
I think a lot of the guys that you've encountered in Minnesota, because you also came out here, you came out for a Bob Dylan retreat too.
Yeah, your writing retreat. Yeah.
Yeah, writing retreat. So I think a lot of the guys that you've encountered out here in Minnesota and the Midwest were raised by men who, like you said, were very stoic. They're not comfortable sharing. They're not comfortable with vulnerability. We've got this kind of John Wayne mentality out here. At least our parents did, just be quiet and do the work. And, you don't like it, but that's just the way it goes, son. You just have to do the things you don't want to do. I forgot his name. Shoot. He was on public radio, and he would say something like, ketchup gets you the energy to get up and go do the things you're supposed to do. I forgot what his name is. Anyway, I think it's a lot of it is just this really guardedness we have in the Midwest. We put on these masks. We don't want to let anybody in, mainly because I don't want to burden you, Brian, with my problems. I should be man enough to handle my problems on my own. I'm just going to swallow this hard. And if I need some alcohol or other drugs to help me swallow that and keep it down, then I'll do that. And I think a lot of that pain just got transmitted. And a lot of us don't know what it's like to have a father who is open and sharing and vulnerable and loving, and just reading poems and hugging and kissing their adult kids and sharing that love. I didn't get that from my dad. The most praise I got from him was secondhand after I moved out of the house. That's when he would brag to other people how proud he was of what I accomplished. And he died in 2003, so I'm still kind of feeling that father hunger, I guess, from him. And I think it's pretty widespread. This may not be just a Midwestern thing. It might be in other regions too. I don't really know.
Yeah, I just think in some ways it's culturally evident, whether or not it's in the certain populations and also movies and things like that. I think of movies like Fargo, they make fun of that on some level, but it's not because, my experience is not because the men from this region are devoid of those deep emotions and feelings. And so I'm glad for that insight that you brought up of Bob Dylan. And, it's worth mentioning Robert Bly was a poet. He translated many poets and brought and popularized, poets like Kabir and Rumi and Hafez in our culture. And of course, Bob Dylan, my goodness, these guys come from this region. So there's an incredible depth of emotion and everything. So, yeah, well, thank you. And I wanted to ask you also, one of the other men that I had talked about, he wished that he had had this initiatory experience as a young man. What I was always taken with right away after I made my rites was how many men were immediately so energized by this. They wanted to give this experience to others. So they would develop the rites in their region or volunteer at a rites of passage. Or some of the men were really keen on bringing this to their sons and to younger men. So men that may be 18 to 30 and maybe even younger adolescent men. And so those rites have developed. You as a man you had 3 brothers, you said you have 2 sons that are grown. You work with middle schoolers, boys and girls, no doubt. But I wonder what you would say about youth rights. And do you have anything to say about youth rights? And how significant you feel it would be to do these initiatory rites sooner rather than later? Because I'm assuming, like me, you encountered this very much in midlife.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see, I was 2013, so I was probably in my, I guess, early 40s. So yeah, we hosted a young men's rights in Minnesota, and I was part of the leadership team. I had a very minor role to play in that, but we had the young men out. One of my son's friends went through it, and it had a different flavor to it. To answer your question, I think a young man's rights and even a boy's rights, if you want to be even younger than that, it would have a different flavor to it, because when you're doing the men's rites of passage, you're kind of helping men in this transition, this almost midlife crisis, if you want to kind of expand it that way. But for young men, they're still building their container. It's okay for them to get these accomplishments and to get these degrees, or to get these accomplishments, to get whatever, as long as they're not confusing the accomplishments with themselves and misplacing their value, them as a man versus this car that I've got in my driveway. And when we did the young men's rights, it had, the stories were similar. The feeling was different, much more visceral, much more physical, the young men went through. But it seemed like the men's rights hit me just at the right time. It seemed like it was just, I don't know, serendipity or divine intervention, I'm not sure. But it seemed to hit me right at the right time. And I think for the young men, it would help them to have that vocabulary, to have them understand that it's okay to build these containers, to develop yourself and to build these accomplishments. But you're going to eventually have this crisis. Something is going to happen that all of those things that you accomplish are not going to help you. And you're going to lose your identity in that. You don't want to keep sailing off on that and try to keep, accomplishing and getting and acquiring and consuming. You got to start slowing down and letting go and going downhill and descend a little bit with others.
I know in my question is sort of that implicit desire all of us have, that idea that, I wish I knew then what I know now, and how would that have changed things? And I think it's worthwhile to say that exposing younger men and boys to these rites and like you said, to this vocabulary, to some of the ritual and just being honest with them about what they're going to experience in life could be really beneficial. For example, I witnessed my parents were not perfect people either, and they would do things like therapy and counseling. They would go on retreats. So there's this acknowledgement that they're wounded. They have issues that need to be addressed and worked on. And that had a profound impact on me, not resisting some of those modalities of counseling and therapy and things as I got older in life, and probably eventually led to the rights. So, I guess that's just a long way of saying it. We often encounter this when it's the right time for us. Ken, you've been involved, like I said, with the Illumine community for a long time. You're now the convener for the Illumine of Minnesota. Can I ask you to share some final words or some thoughts, anything?
Illumine is more than just the rites of passage now. When in 2013, that was kind of the only thing that they did. But now we have counsel circles, and we have virtual counsel circles. We have events and retreats that are not the rites of passage. There's online opportunities. There's lots of avenues for men to access these relationships. And I think that's one of the things that the Young Men's Rights offered, was access to these relationships, these really deep, meaningful ones, not the surface level ones. The surface level ones are fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's more than just that. And join a counsel circle. If the 5-day retreat thing doesn't work for you, then there's virtual counsel circles online. There's ways that you can find these relationships with guys, and it's really meaningful. And you asked before about something that I recall from the rites of passage. I remember the contemplative sits, and it was really amazing for me to feel the power of 40, 50 guys sitting in a circle and not saying anything for like 20 minutes. We're just breathing and being together, and just the power of that group silence was amazing. I often crave that. Just reach out and have access to these relationships. There's lots of avenues that you can get into it, whether it's a rites of passage, or if you've already done the rites and you want dive deeper, become an initiator, take that second dip in. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at there.
Yeah. I chuckle because a lot of us, especially when you and I were making the rights, there wasn't as much available. And so it required to jump into the deep end. But as you said, you don't have to go that route. If you're the type of person that would like to wade in and test things out, like you said, there's virtual councils, there's local councils in many places throughout the country. There's other retreats and events. And you guys do such a great job of keeping men engaged throughout the year. So thank you so much, Ken, for your time. And I really appreciate it, brother. And I just want to say I love you and thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I love you too.
For those listening who are now feeling a tug in their own soul and are curious to learn more, allow me to share a bit about the history of these rites. The men's rites of passage was originally developed by Father Richard Rohr and was first offered at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico in 1996. While it was supported for many years by the Center for Action and Contemplation, since 2012, Illumin has been the steward of this work, preserving and adapting the rites for men all over the world. To learn more about the history and the theology behind this work, I highly recommend reading Adam's Return by Richard Rohr. If you are ready to make your rites, there are 4 opportunities in the United States and another in the United Kingdom in 2026. The first is in Northern California, May 13th through the 17th. The second in the United Kingdom, July 22nd through the 26th. And in Illinois, August 12th through the 16th. There's one on the East Coast in New Jersey, September 16th through the 20th. And the final one of the year is in Texas, which is in MROP and Umbrales, our Spanish language rites, September 30th through October 4th. You can find details and registration information at illumin.org/MROP or illumin.org/events. Additionally, mark your calendars for Awaken, the annual national gathering of Illumin, taking place November 5th through the 8th in New Mexico. You can find more at illumin.org/awaken. Finally, a special thank you to our sponsor, Choosing Presence. If today's conversation moved you, I encourage you to bring more intentionality into your daily life. Download the Practicing Presence app for free at choosingpresence.org/app. It's a simple but profound way to stay connected to the journey we've discussed today. Thank you for listening to Follow Me to the MROP. Until next time, brothers, stay present.